Hey Gear Seekers, I'm Nick. There's small form factor, and then there's this. It's the Velka, or the Velkase VK3 V2.1. It's a 3.9 litre small form factor case. Crazy, right? Now there's a bit of a story with us and this case. We actually received this case back in November 2020, and we waited from then until now to actually get a decent GPU that fits in this case. And you guys know what GPU stock and prices have been like, but today we finally got our hands on one. Anytime we go sub 5 liters, it's gonna be something special. Let's take a closer look. This video is brought to you by MSI and the all-new Spatium series SSDs. These new Spatium drives from MSI feature the latest 3D NAND flash technology that bring dense storage in a compact design and allow Spatium storage capacities up to 4 terabytes. These new drives from MSI are suitable for both desktop PCs and notebooks, with support for the Sony PlayStation 5 coming with the new MSI Spatium Play SSD range. Plus, for Australian and New Zealand viewers, score a bonus Steam gift card for a limited time when you purchase selected MSI products using the promotion link in the description below. Terms and conditions apply. In terms of small form factor cases, the VK3 is one of the smallest cases that you'll find. Like, there isn't anything really smaller than this, and there's a reason why it can pull it off, but we'll get into that in a minute. But let's start off with some panel removal. There's an assortment of screws on the backside to get into the VK3. We're just gonna get into that. These screws have little nuts on the back side of them as well, because they're actually bolts, and the reason why they have this is because these ones are actually designed to hold in the power supply. It's been such a long time since I pulled this apart that I forgot that there was more screws that we need to undo. It's so funny actually, it's such a small case, but there's just so many little biddies that they've kind of put together to hold all of this together. Once we loosen those other screws, we can then just pull the front panel off and it will just pop out in one whole thing. And now we can get access to the internals. Look at that, ladies and gents, we're basically disassembling this whole thing. It's crazy when you think about it because there's just so many tiny little screws. The other thing is you can get away with not putting some of these screws in, hear me out, because you can make it easy to get into after the fact as well. This is one of those cases where if you're building in it, it's good to bench test everything before you chuck it in. Otherwise, yeah, you know how that goes already, ladies and gents. In terms of motherboard support, there isn't a lot to talk about considering it'll only do ITX boards, and that's kind of the point of this case. This is really what it's meant for, is super small form factor, and there's no other real room for any type of other motherboard. To build in a case like the VK3, you're going to need a power supply that looks a little something like this. This is called Flex ATX. It's a very specialized small power supply, smaller than SFX, very, very thin, and the one that we have here happens to be 600 watts in this tiny little form factor. So this will be the power supply that we're using. In terms of getting your hands on Flex ATX power supplies, they are not that hard to come across, but they are very expensive. So if you're going sub 5 litre, that's another thing you need to take into account, that it is actually quite expensive to go this size. And no, the power supply does not come with the case. You do need to purchase a power supply separately. This is a very different case in terms of things that you've probably seen around with other types of cases. And what I mean by that is for CPU cooler clearance, you're looking at about 37 millimeters. There's only 2 coolers really that, or maybe 3 coolers that are compatible. There's a Cooler Master one, the GM200 from memory. There's also the Noctua NH-L9i. I've got a fresh one here actually. There's also a Johnsbow cooler as well that is compatible with it as well, you know. We're going to be using this. It's the RTX 3060 Ti AERO from MSI. This has been a very hard card for us to get our hands on here in Australia. I know in other countries they've been available, but here they've been like a unicorn. You just cannot find them anywhere. So it's good to finally see one here. When you go to install the components in this case, you actually need to remove these front bars as well. I'm gonna take this out really quickly just to show you how the GPU fits. And you wouldn't believe it, but the motherboard that we're using is getting delivered today and it hasn't arrived yet. So it's on board for delivery. It should arrive any minute. I'm just waiting for the doorbell to just ring so you guys can hear it in the video. You can build such a small little beast of a gaming PC or an editing PC in such a tiny form factor. Just to give you an idea of how small this case is, now I'm not going to install the GPU properly, obviously, because there's a couple other things we need to chat about first, but yeah, just an idea. This is how small the case is, right? It's tiny. And remember, it doesn't look like it's going to clear, but that's because that bar is removed. But yeah, this thing is ridiculous. It is so small. While I've got the front bars out, I might as well show you how to install the power supply. So once those two metal bars are pulled out, you basically kind of front load the power supply and slide it all the way through like that. In terms of included accessories, you get a riser cable. I can't remember if this is a PCIe Gen 3 or Gen 4. I'm pretty sure this is a PCIe Gen 3 one because it's been sitting around for so long, but you do get a Gen 4 option with this case as well. You get a power button, which is also a combined power light as well that you need to install yourself. You get some rubber feet to install on the bottom of the case, as well as a box of screws and everything you're going to need to build in this case, which is kind of funny because the box is almost the size of the case itself. Not really. There's no front panel I/O in this case, and it doesn't really need it because the case is so small that you can just put your hand at the back of it anyway, or just turn it around. All that's on the front of the case is the hole that's cut out for the combined power LED and power button. That's basically everything you need to know about this little guy here, the Velka 3. So let's get into it and start building, and then we'll take a look at all the thermals and all the little things I found with building in this case. So let's jump right in. ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed the build in the Velka 3. Let's take a look at the thermals for this build. What you're seeing on your screen right now is the thermals actually aren't too bad. Now, no underclocking, no undervolting, absolutely nothing. Didn't change the fan curves, did nothing. And the system remained relatively quiet. It makes a bit of noise when it's ramping up, but it's actually not too bad. And if you have problems with it, this is what I always say, put some headphones on and you'll be good to go. Most people are using headphones and stuff, and you're not gonna hear this over the sound of your headphones. I guarantee that. With saying that, this is only a 65 watt part, and the GPU as well, they don't get too hot. So there you have it, ladies and gents, thermals for a 3.9 litre mini ITX small form factor beast, because that's exactly what this is. Okay. Let's talk about some of those parts. Now, the CPU is the Intel Core i5-12400. We put the 12400 on the Gigabyte B660i AORUS Pro DDR4. Earlier in the video, I mentioned, which was actually yesterday or the day before, whenever it was, because sometimes I'll build these PCs and, you know, take a couple days to test and do all that stuff. But I mentioned that a motherboard was coming today, yay. Well, it didn't arrive. And we didn't use the board that we plan on using. This is the board we're actually gonna use, right? And I know you guys are probably like, oh, you should have used the Z690i Unify. That would have looked sick. That would have been good together. But it only arrived about 15 minutes ago. So bad luck next time. We've got another really cool build with this motherboard coming very, very soon. So stay tuned and subscribe and all that jazz. To cool the 12400, we use the Noctua NH-L9i, but it's the LGA 1700 version of the cooler, and it's the Chromax version, so it's all blacked out. And that's kind of what I wanted to do with this. I wanted to black it out. I went and bought this cooler specifically for this build. The RAM is 32 gigs of Corsair Vengeance LPX. I had this sitting in the RAM tray and I figured, you know what? We don't have heaps of clearance, and LPX memory is kind of the perfect RAM for a build like this. It doesn't need to be flashy at all. It just needs to fit and it just needs to work, and I never had problems with LPX. The GPU is the MSI AERO RTX 3060 Ti. It is one of the smallest 3060 Ti's on the market, if not the smallest, and it fits perfectly in the Velka 3. Now, what about this case specifically? Well, if you followed along with the build section of the video, you would have noticed me doing things a certain way, like installing the riser cable and then putting in the motherboard and then pulling it out and then putting the GPU. The reason why you do it this way, it allows you to put certain things in a certain order later down the line. So with builds like this, you will find yourself removing things as you're putting things in at the same time. And it's mainly about cable management, especially with the riser cable. If you're following along, you'll see that the way that I built this is one of the many ways you can put a Velka 3 together. The thing is with these ultra small form factor cases, they're tricky to build in. There's no questions about that at all. I'm not even gonna comment on that, because you know exactly what you're getting yourself into if you're building in something this small. It's gonna be quite tricky, but this one is not too bad. I didn't find myself having any real trouble with getting anything to fit. And overall, a pretty pleasant experience, but I will drop the massive caveat that this case is not for beginner PC builders. You would want to know a few things about PC building if you're building in something like this, because it is very compact. And even things like the riser cables, people who haven't built before will probably freak out at how much you have to bend the cable itself, and people probably think that you'll break something, but you won't. These things are built pretty solid, and most of the time I never have problems with stuff like that. This thing didn't give me any problems. Fired up, was ready to go. In fact, the riser cable in this was PCIe Gen 4 as well, so I didn't have any problems with configuring the BIOS. It just worked, and this is probably the smallest case I've ever built a PC in. Not saying that there's not smaller PCs, because obviously they have those mini PCs and they can get quite small, but being able to get off-the-shelf components to build in a case of this size, it's kind of ridiculous. And I absolutely love it. But let us know what you think about the Velka 3, and I'll put a PC part pick list down below in the description, so if you want to see what everything is that I use in this, it'll be all there. But The truth is, I basically talked about all of it in this anyway. And if you like the music you heard here, you can get it by clicking that join button down below or heading on over to Patreon or Floatplane or one of those other platforms that we put stuff up. And if you like the video, you know what to do. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. It kind of looks like a thumbs up. Ring the little bell and look at the graph. This one right here. Look at it. Yep. You already know what to do. Okay, let's put the graph away. Anyways, ladies and gents, I'm your boy Nick with Gear Seekers. You peek, we seek. And I hope you enjoyed seeing this come together because this has been sitting here since November 2020. It took us that long to get the GPU for this. We went through so many CPU generations from Intel alone. It was like 3 generations or something stupid. Yeah, 3. We went from 10th gen when this arrived, then 11th, now we're at 12th gen. AMD only went through no generations in that time. That's showing you how crazy it is, eh? Like, Intel's really trying to like grab that market share back, and AMD is like, nah, we got this, guys, it's all good. It's gonna be a fun year later on in the year with hardware and stuff. I'm excited. But yeah, 3.9 liters. Wild, absolutely wild. Thanks for watching.